My dear friends, the next game I'm going to show you is from Bundesliga 2006, and my opponent was a young and very gifted player, Michael Richter, and this is one of the games where queens are very soon exchanged, and you get sort of half endgame, half middle game very soon. So knight f3, after several moves in the Catalan opening. You see, the queens were exchanged very early, and in fact no other pieces have been exchanged but queens. And it is not so easy to play this kind of endgames, because normal strategies, normal endgame strategies, they do not apply yet. Because there are many pieces on the board. For instance, you do not start by bringing your king to the center. It is way too dangerous, and you first start by developing your pieces just like as if queens were on the board. So let us take a look at this particular position. You see that white has more space in the center, has basically more space in general, and black on the other hand has no weaknesses. At the moment he has the c-file and has some play also connected to ideas like bishop b4, maybe sometimes f6 and so on. So first of all, white starts by fighting for the c-file. With knight e3, the rook has to retreat, and bishop d2. So his ideas would be just to slowly improve the placement of his pieces. For instance, at some point rook c1 or rook ec1, then maybe bishop f1, bishop b5. At some point he may think of a4, a5. So in general he has some ideas. Black on the other hand can, for instance, start by playing bishop a6 in order to prevent bishop f1, because the exchange would be to black's favor, because the white's bishop is potentially a stronger piece, because black's bishop would be limited by the central pawns on d5 and e6. But in fact, it is not clear whether this would have changed so much compared to the game after rook ac1, and probably black would still play knight c7. So he went knight c7 at once. It should be noted that the breakthrough f6, although would give black more freedom, also leaves him with a weakness on e6, which might be unpleasant after moves like bishop h3, knight c7, rook ac1, for instance. So bishop d2, knight c7, and rook ac1. It is also important that in an endgame like this should not be immediately evaluated. It is too early for this. Not much has happened yet, and it is better just to play for a while and to start with evaluations later on, when the position has been clarified to some extent, when some pieces have been exchanged. So here he went bishop a6. Yeah, it should be noted that because black has less space, the fact that no pieces have been exchanged is at the moment strongly to white's favor. Black's pieces are a bit clumsily placed, and that's why difficult for him to fight for the c-file. I would rather, as black, play something maybe strangely looking, but with a direct idea to exchange some pieces on the c-file, let's say by playing knight a6. Knight is not so greatly positioned on a6, but on the other hand, it enables moves like bishop b4, and after, let's say, a3, black could ease the pressure considerably by exchanging a pair of rooks. And I think this would be a reasonable strategy, because when you have less space, it is good to exchange as many pieces as you can, because the remaining pieces will find it easier to discover good spots. But my opponent went bishop a6. Okay, the move looks natural, but on the other hand now you see it is not clear what kind of future the knight, for instance, on c7 has. To go to b5 is a bit absurd because of possible bishop f1. To go to a8 is a bit passive, and to go back to e8 apparently makes little sense. So you see black already has problems with his coordination, and that's why I decided just to proceed on the king side, because I didn't see what black would be doing. h4 is a normal move, just trying to gain some space. if necessary, I can still go h5, h6, causing weaknesses, and who knows, at some point it might be useful for me. So here also, after bishop a6, now black has to exchange rooks, and ugly as it may seem, I think the move like knight a8 had to be played, and black tries to take on c1 and play rook c8 afterwards. But even here, if I play something like bishop h3, I create unpleasant threats like knight d5, and d7 is hanging afterwards. Let's say after rook takes c1, rook takes c1, rook c8. Here I can take knight takes d5, rook c1, bishop c1, e takes d5, bishop d7, winning the pawn. So you see, it is already not so easy for black to develop, and maybe his mistake was to play bishop a6 here, and probably should have started by exchanging the rooks immediately. You see, we have endgame kind of position, very closed, but still black should maneuver with great precision because he has less space, and after a careless move like bishop a6, h4, it seems that it is no longer easy to do what he wanted to do, so to exchange some pieces. Maybe even as the position is closed, it was necessary to admit that he made a mistake, and maybe just to return to b7, although absurd as it may look, with an idea to go knight a6 and then begin exchanges, also defending on d5 against the possible bishop h3 and knight d5. But okay, you see, the position is not so easy to play. My opponent played, after h4 he played b5. Now this looks like a normal move, trying to activate the knight, also trying to go b4 at some point. But on the other hand, it should be remembered that pawns, they do not go back, and with this structure, you see there are many weaknesses in black's position. Now I can go with my bishop to a5. I can also probably at some point use the square b4, occupy the square c5, and it should be noted that at some point after the timely b4, the bishop on a6 will be horribly bad, hemmed in by his own pawns, b5, d5, e6. So a b5 is the move that should rather be avoided or played only when really necessary. In this position after b5, probably black had in mind the activization with b4, but after simple bishop f1, as we know, white was planning this move anyway. Now it is becoming very difficult for black to proceed, because after b4, white uses the simple tactical trick, goes rook c7, rook takes c7, bishop takes a6 to win material, because in this position clearly two pieces are stronger than the rook. So my opponent proceeded with knight b6. Now, of course, he gets some active ideas, and it is the best to play b3, and black makes still one more active move, and rook c2. And now more or less black's activity is finished. Still he has serious problems with his pieces, and white can improve his position more or less at his ease. Also because all the pieces left black's king. At some point white can even start attacking. Bishop d3, h5, h6, knight g4. Even without queens there is quite some attacking potential in positions like this. So black has to do something. As we said, b4 is not working because of rook c7, and otherwise difficult to come up with an idea. So black returns to what he in fact had to do many moves ago, to the idea of exchanging rooks, plays knight a8. But now exchanging rooks already is not so helpful, because black has a weakness on b5, and after the rook exchange, knight comes to c2 with a win of with the gain of time, and then goes to b4, hitting the bishop on a6. You see the clumsy position, the weaknesses basically often provide for the unexpected dangers, And in this case also white does not react to this, plays bishop d3, black plays rook c7, and now you see the square c1 is not accessible to white's rook, and black wants to go rook c8, and despite all the problems of black's position, it is not yet so easy to see how to break through, because once white loses the c file, it will not be so easy to win the game at all, and black's only weakness b5 is not so easy to attack, so white should here maneuver with some precision, and I would like to show you the continuation of the game in our next clip. We continue where we left. My game against Richter, and as I said, it is very important to fight for the only open file. Black wants to go rook c8, and now white shouldn't hesitate and take rook c7. Now, in fact, it might look as if white is helping black to activate the knight on a8. On the other hand, the square c7 is not all that great, and on c7, black's knight is also in the way of black's rook, so black cannot fight for the c file so well anymore. So in fact, after knight c7, white goes knight c2, obtaining the square c1, bishop e7, and knight b4. Now you see white is threatening to win the pawn, and in case of bishop takes b4, white would obtain two very strong bishops, and also black squares would be horribly weak in black's position, and in fact this position would already be almost resignable, because white would just proceed rook c1, bishop d6, and at some point b5 would fall, or some other things would happen to black's position. So black tries to hold on to his valuable bishop, goes bishop b7, rook c1, and he goes rook c8. Now still it is not so clear what white has achieved. At some point black wants to remove the knight in order to exchange some pieces, but his b5 pawn is hanging at the moment. However, it is not so easy for white to improve his position, so I decided to use this occasion to get the advantage of two bishops, played knight c6. You see, a7 is hanging and e7 is hanging. Black has to react, and he would also be losing material if he would play bishop a3, attacking the rook, because after knight a7 white also attacks the rook and will remain with the pawn up. For instance, after bishop a3, knight c8, bishop d2, knight b6, followed by knight d7, c5, where despite the fact that now black has two bishops, it should not be so difficult to realize the pawn, because the bishop on b7 is very passive. So black had to surrender his bishop, and rook c6. Now this is a normal, typical ending for this kind of structure, and should be noted that black got rid of his bad bishop, but on the other hand white obtained the advantage of two bishops, which can become very useful if the position is opened. White's plan could be maybe to bring the king around, and at some point to start advancing the king side. And also black, saddled by weaknesses on the queen side, will not find it very easy to do something in return. His counterplay is connected to great difficulties. He goes b4 in order to liberate the knight from c7 somehow, because otherwise it is not clear how he should proceed at all, because now after a move like knight e8, the pawn b5 is hanging. So he goes b4. On the other hand, also the pawn on b4 is susceptible to all sorts of attacks after knight e1, knight c2, and this in fact provides white with a short-term plan. I go knight e1. It should be noted that if black hadn't played b4, he would still have to do something at some point, because otherwise he would be helpless in the long run against the advance of the pawns on the king side, and also moves like bishop a5, attacking b6, and so on. So he plays b4, knight e1, starting to attack the weak pawn, knight a8, rook a8, rook c8, knight c8. So you see black finally exchanged both rooks, what in fact he had aimed for from the very beginning, got rid of his bad bishops, but it just his bad luck that in the process he has this weak pawn on b4, which is impossible to protect. So I proceed with bishop a6, knight b6, knight c2, and after knight c7, white has this resource bishop b4, and everything grows together, because now after bishop b4, knight b4, white is a pawn up, and also after knight a6, bishop e7, white is pawn up. And also in most of these lines, the knight on b6 is horribly placed, because he has no access to squares c4 and a4. So white is actually winning comfortably. My opponent, who was trying to defend very hard, finds another resource, takes bishop takes h4, and in fact it seems that white hasn't won a pawn after all, because now after g takes h4, black takes on a6, and this I didn't want to allow. But on the other hand, you see, even with the material balance, the pawns a2, b3 against the pawn on a7 represent a very strong majority on the queen side, and in the presence of two bishops against the clumsily placed knights, I might not need material advantage anymore, so I just play bishop d3, he goes bishop d8, and I go f4. You see, now I'm planning to move my king to the center, probably to move my knight to ideal position to f3, and then slowly start my play on the queen side. And it's not easy for black to do something against it. My opponent desperately wanted to bring his king into the battle. Now you see that the square f8 is not available to the black king, and played f5. Also gaining some space, but on the other hand, in this particular position, this weakens the pawn on e6 so much that it probably only helps white to bring home his advantage. So I started by bishop d6, brought my king around, and just basically I want to some point proceed with my play. Black is looking for counterplay, played h5, bishop e to g6, but as very often happens, the attempt to get counterplay creates more weaknesses, and I decided here that it will probably be the easiest to use the weakness of the squares g5 and e6, transferred my knight to f3, knight e1, knight e8, bishop b4, and knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c5. You see, so important are strategic details of the positions, and they are that white has two bishops, pawn majority on the queen side, king in the center, and more space. And so clumsy are black's pieces is that despite the material balance, black's position is already absolutely resignable. He went still bishop e7, bishop b5, and after bishop c5, knight g5 check, he resigned, largely because after king e7, white can choose from many winning positions. First of all, d takes c5 should be winning now with 3 pawns against 1, and otherwise also bishop takes c6 immediately with an idea to take bishop takes e8, knight takes e6, winning the pawn, keeping all the advantages, and then slowly organizing the passed pawn on the queen side. So you see, I hope this was an instructive example. The semi-closed position, but nevertheless I would like to draw your attention once again to the position after knight c2, knight b4, bishop b7, rook c1, rook c8. Now, despite the fact that black's bishop on b7 is very passive, it is limited by his own pawns, and usually bishops are not so great in this kind of semi-closed positions. Still, it is important in this case to go for the advantage of two bishops with knight c6, bishop c6, rook c6. The reason for this is that the position will not remain closed forever. White will have means of opening it up, and also the bishop was protecting some important squares where white pieces were able to penetrate with great effect later on. That is bishop a6, rook c6, and so on. So remember this, in the endgame, two bishops are often of great value, and after this nice and very instructive game, I suggest we proceed with some other examples.